Welcome once again to another one of my photography critiques of Photobook. Now, this time we have someone special. It is the now graduated AKB48 member, Kizaki Yuria. Now, this photobook is a little bit different from other ones, and not because of the photos or anything, but it's a little bit of how varied it is. You'll be able to see that once I'm actually inside of the photobook and actually looking at the photos. Now, as I always say, looking at the photobook, picking it up, feeling it, turning the page is 10,000 times better than looking at it online. So always go and buy the photobook in order to support them. And plus, I imagine you want to look at the images at the best they can be. And a little bit about the photographer. It is actually Takeo Deck, who has done Sakurai Reika's photobook, which I actually critiqued over here. And you can see what I thought about the photobook and maybe compare it to what I think about this photobook and see the differences. And a fair warning, I do not cover all of the photos, only the photos that I pick up or I want to talk about. If you want to see all the photos, again, pick it up. So looking at this front cover, we see a very stylistic photo of a portrait. It seems like a lot of these photo books recently have been doing just super close portraits of the people. Like not so much of showing like the full body or anything, especially with the idol ones, and especially 48, 46 related ones. So it is a little bit interesting that they're focusing on the person themselves instead of their features. And I do want to start off by saying that this front cover pose isn't the best ever. I mean, it does give off the impression of, hey, this is me and get ready for my photo book. But the posing of the hand is something that has always bothered me looking at this photo book. And that's because her hand is showing like this instead of showing like this, showing off the skinnier side of the hand, and showing like this is a little bit more masculine. But then again, she doesn't have a big hand, so it doesn't detract too much, but it still is a thing to look out for in posing. And looking at the back, we can see that this is a nice kind of like environmental shot. And even though we have blown highlights everywhere, it doesn't distract me too much from the photo. In this kind of environment, it's really hard to get a good photo, especially because this is probably in direct sun, and then back here is in the shadows. So it's really hard, and especially with this time of day. So always be careful while you're shooting and make sure the background isn't too dark or super bright. Like if she shot from over here and then shot to the outside, then the outside would be even more blown out. Which, I mean, in some cases isn't horrible, but most of the time it doesn't turn out that good. And then looking at the actual photo book, we can actually see this, which is actually her in front of the SKE theater instead of the regular AKB48 theater, because as you know, she came from SKE48. So that is a definite nice little touch that they did. All right, so let's see first of all what I got as the surprise in this little cool, it's in fact a cool little like little postcard thing that says many thanks to you. You can see that, many thanks to you. And here we have a little written message from her. And then we have a photo over here, which you can see isn't that bad, but it isn't the best. I mean, we got the sides of the arms right there, but it isn't actually like super like, oh man, I would want to keep this forever kind of image. Okay, so actually diving into the photo book, we can see that we start off with this, a peace sign, and as her nickname is Peace, so that's a really nice touch by the photographer right there, that to include her nickname with the peace sign. As you see, there's a lead over here, and it goes to this opening right here, but then the peace sign is right here in the middle, so naturally the eye goes this way, and the peace sign is right there at a nice point. So very nice establishing shot to start off the photo book. And then we move on to what I talked about earlier, where if you stand in the shade, you get a little bit overblown back over here. I think it's very fortunate that this actually came up, because then you see over here, her in the shadows, you see that she's actually underexposed by the face, and the background is overexposed, which means like she's like too dark and the background's too bright. So, I mean, you either get full blown out with her fairly exposed, or get the background fairly exposed and her just in shadow. It's always a tough road to do this type of photography. Maybe a flash would have helped, but then some people don't like that light that looks like it comes out of nowhere. But maybe if you get one big enough, then it looks like you're just in a small little coverage where the light is coming in from both sides. Now, I usually talk about in these photo book critiques how I don't like where people divide it in half. But as we see in this photo, I actually like where they divide it in half. And that's right here. And it doesn't bother me because nothing important is being cut off. As you see, she's holding up her dress, kind of obscuring everything. And the fact that it's right here in the middle where the dress is, it doesn't really matter that it's cut right there, because we have her hiding over here, and then we have the obvious object over here, which is trying to be shown off. Now here we go. This is what I was talking about, having her exposed, but then the background fully white or completely overexposed. As you see, this whole background is just like, this could be like a studio shot. That's how white it is. And her, she's fairly exposed. And even though we have the distracting yellow thing, that just really got me right now. Like, the yellow thing is like all I see now, even with these blues over here. I guess the fact that there's yellow really makes it pop out compared to these darker blues over here. So I'm more distracted by this. But I do like the soft light that's coming from the other side of the coverage and the backlight, which is actually helping out define some of her body. Now this one was close to actually being something I would complain about, but it actually isn't because of two reasons. One, this line is straight. Thank you for using the straightening tool in the Lightroom. And we have the fact that her limbs aren't completely cut off. As I said before, if you cut off at the wrist, then it looks a little distracting. It looks like she doesn't have a hand. Or if you cut off at any joints in general, that's usually bad. But right here, they left a little bit more so then you can actually see that it isn't cut off at the joints, which is actually a fairly nice touch. Although on this one, you can see right here that it cuts off at the knuckles and at the toes, which is no good. Next off, we have these couple of images right here, these two, which I want to talk about. And the first one being this one, just a cute, like in the moment kind of photo. It isn't really one that could be planned that much. It's mostly just like, oh hey, there's a cute baby, turned around, snapped, and got a good photo. Sometimes that's what it takes to be a good photographer, just being able to capture that right moment. And then we'll on to this one, which is kind of planned because you could tell that she stood there and then turned for the camera and took a picture. It's kind of a little bit too posed for me. Meanwhile, like compare this one to this one. Like this one's much more natural, while this one's a little bit like, okay, I'm ready for my picture. And here's another one of those in the moment shots. Again, these are great, and especially when you capture such a great moment. And then this one right here is actually fairly distracting because number one, we have this in the way, and then we have her hand in the way of her mouth actually showing what she's eating. I mean, clearly you can see on this side, but then you can't see the action of it going into the mouth. And then we have some distracting stuff over here, which is actually fairly in focus. And I mean, I understand why your aperture is so small because you want to be able to capture that sharpness, which I actually appreciate that the photographer did. Next, we move on to the photo with kind of nasty lighting. It isn't too bad, but I don't like the fact that we have like coverage of one eye in shadow and the rest in shadow. If she turned maybe a little bit up and then a little bit to the side, then maybe the eyes could have got into the sun. Or if you go the other way around, maybe both eyes could have gone in shadow with some of the nose going in shadow too, kind of making it not as distracting. And this one right here is a shot that I actually really like. I like the big openness of it, the big environmental part of it. I like that the trees over here aren't too distracting, and there's even this little red thing just to kind of let your eye rest. Like, you get tired of looking at all this green. You need something of a different color, and this blue is a little bit close to this green. So having this right here is kind of like, ooh, there's this, and then there's this, and now I could go back and look at the rest. And again, standing at this position, photographer thinks, oh hey, that's a place where there's shade. If I take it there, then the full light will come onto her and it will be nice, flat, natural light, which actually looks really good in this photo. Next, we have this photo, and the fact that there's strings leading everywhere and kind of helps the eye a lot. And I can see that the photographer really took advantage of this by having her, I don't know if it was his idea or her idea, but having her pull this down and kind of like pulling it towards this page. Because over here you see all the environment, but then you see the string pulling down and this string pulling down, kind of leading the eye towards her. And plus, look at those hands, they're on the side. And plus she's doing kind of like the over the shoulder kind of look, which is actually really nice in this kind of pose. Now I would talk about this photo being blurry, but I feel like that's the only other photo that was decent out of the rest of these getting out of the boats sequence. So, I mean, I understand why it's put in, but at the same time, it could have been to the side. I don't know why more people put it to the side. I feel like it could really come to advantage just like I've seen other photo books do before. Next, we talk about this photo right here, which is actually really nice. And that's because of, let's see, 1, 2, 3 reasons. That's 3 reasons right there. And that's number 1, because the sky actually mixes with this sky. And look at that line, it's almost there and it meshes nice, making it look like one photo from the top and kind of like combining it and making it one complete package. So that's a nice side of either the photographer or the publisher. Number 2 reason, environmental. You see lots of the environment, you see where she is, and that's important to a photo book that's on location because you want to see where it is, the location where they shot at. You don't just want to see close-ups of the person and not know where they are because they could have shot that anywhere. And number 3 reason is because she kind of stands out from everything, even though there's a lot of distracting features from everywhere. And that has to do with the fact that even though this is bright right here, she's actually like around the same brightness level of that. So she meshes in with that and able to stand out from everything else. It would have been a little bit more useful if this was a little darker and then she was like a tad bit brighter compared to this. But over here it looks fine, and especially the red she's wearing really pops out because red and green are actually very contrasty, and if you put both they kind of stand out. Next, I'll talk about this photo right here, which I weirdly like the composition of, and I think it's the fact that there's so many straight lines in this. I mean, we have this straight line, we have this straight line, this straight line, this straight line, and then we have her running in between all of the straight lines, which I actually think is pretty dynamic. I don't know, it might be the geometry in this that actually appeals to me. Next, we have this photo right here, which is actually crooked, as you can tell by the horizon line over here. And another thing that I noticed is the highlights are blown, but the face is still underexposed. Maybe just a stop more and the face would have been exposed right. And even if this is white, I mean, it's still going to be white whether you stay there or go a stop above. Although one concern with that is that all of this detail over here would be gone. Next, we have this one, which is very gravure-like. And one thing that bothers me is right here is where the little divide is, and that's at the bend of the body, the point where the S curve happens and we get the action from the stomach to the hip, and it kind of mixes around, and in this case it isn't horrible as we've seen before, but it still is a little bit distracting. Oh man, I had to skip through like a lot of fan servicey shots. So we finally get here, and this is a little bit unique because you're so close to the source of light over here, which I imagine is a window, that it's a little bit contrasty during this point, although it is soft light, so it is a little bit confusing here. If you try to expose for the highlights, then all these already dark shadows become even darker. So it is a hard balance to get. It is definitely tricky to get. So do remember that the face should have a cheek line when taking photos, and having it like this kind of makes it look like it's all connected by one and like there's no bones there or anything. And also one thing I like about this more is the pose and the fact that they use the full curves to the advantage, including the arm, although I don't like the elbow pointing to the camera, but I do like the crossing of the legs over here. Very classic move that actually looks good. Next we have this photo right here, which reminds me of Shiraishi Mai's photo that was in the hotel, which I actually went to, which you can see over here and see my adventures in LA. But this photo kind of reminds me of it, and I think it's the fact of the posing and the lower angle of the photo. Posing is kind of open, and the angle being low kind of shows a little bit of dominance. And plus the blue colors everywhere kind of match really well together. Now I want to talk about this shot. Now even though it's crooked, I do like this shot, and that's because we have 2 factors here. Number 1, she's fairly exposed. And number 2, there is this obscure thing right here, but I think that actually adds a lot to the photo. It kind of adds that voyeuristic feel while feeling professional. It adds a nice little element of something else. It's not juxtaposition, but it does add a little bit of a thought from the photographer's mind of having something obscured right here, but not completely obscured, so it's kind of like someone looking and they sneaked up just a little bit and then saw everything. Again, it is about putting the viewer into that mindset of they're there and actually looking, which I've seen before in other photo books, which I don't think have been right. It's kind of been like, oh, I have a telephoto lens, I'm looking at you. Meanwhile, this is a little bit more intentional in its way of putting things in front of the camera and the subject. And here's another one of those photos. You can see right here looking through a little slot and then her looking back at the person. And we have something else really, really smart, and that's these tubes right here leading up to her, and then having this little sliver right here with the tubes just leading directly towards her. Really, really nice. Next, we have this image right here, which I don't know if it's a play on one of the famous photographs. I don't remember what it's called, but this kind of reminds me of that style. If this thing over here wasn't there, then it would have been a super nice image, everything looking grungy, and then her not looking like super, super fashionable, but still looking fashionable enough to stand out from the environment. So yes, I really like this. There's really some thought into this photo. I've seen some other photographers do this in other photo books, and it's really nice. Now, I do have to say, these aren't my favorite set of images in this photo book. This is kind of like, oh hey, we're at the pool. I guess we should just take photos while we're here, because there isn't, I mean, right here it does have a nice edge lighting, and it does fall into shadow, kind of blending into the background, but that doesn't distract me too much. The posing is pretty nice, but something about this kind of gives me like a spontaneous vibe, which maybe they were going for, but I feel like it was a little bit too spontaneous. And also we have this ring shot, which I actually don't like the lighting of typically because of this reason. It's because look, this is all bright and this falls into shadow fairly quickly. Over here, it isn't that bad because everything is like on the same plane of field almost. But then right here, it's a little bit more noticeable that this is blown out and then this is fairly even. And then over here, it's a little darker. So it isn't my favorite. I have seen some other ones where they've done it well. But in this case, night shots, ring lights, it is a trademark look for some people, but it's just not my taste. Next, we have a shot of her at a circus in Thailand. And it's actually interesting because it is a little bit posy. And the fact that these people are sharper than her, again, it must be really dark at night. And focus could be a little off if it's on auto. It could get something in the background instead because it's so dark. There's a lot of factors in this, and it's pretty difficult to tell when something is in focus in the dark. Next, we have this image right here, which, I mean, this is almost completely dark. I can't imagine how much ink that costs to print this page out alone. Now, even though this is a little bit blurry, this is a little bit more of the, hey, stand there and pose, but kind of like play around with it. So it's not so much of a stand there, look at me, snap. It's kind of like a stand there, play around with the posing, and then I'll snap, which I appreciate way more. And also we have a nice rim light by that car right there, very nice touch. And finally, we have these two images. This image right here, which is actually orange because there's probably a light behind the photographer, and then this over here being like a nice purpley light. I don't know if orange and purple go together. I know green and purple go together. But anyway, this is the stylistic choice that the photographer went with. It didn't distract too bad. I just wish there was a little bit more rim light or a kick light behind her. That way it could kind of separate her from the Ferris wheel, because they're both dark and dark hair. So it kind of like mixes in together. And lastly, we have an alternate image of the inside cover, and it's pretty much the same thing. It's just her looking up. I actually think this one's a little bit nicer than the one on the inside cover. And just because of the smile that she has here, the other one is a little bit like, I also just want to point this one out right here, a little dab. Now these next series of images, which is actually after the final page, but these images are a little weird. I feel like they tried to do it, but it's just something wasn't wrong, and they're just like, okay, we can't reshoot this because people are going to catch on. So let's just keep these images. Now this is clearly in front of Don Quixote, and it looks like it'll be like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. around there. I don't know what time the sun gets up in Japan, but this image does look a little bit dark, as you can see. And that's the fact that I think they tried to expose for the actual building instead of for her, which is actually very difficult to do if the building is brighter than your subject. So yeah, maybe doing a little bit of Photoshop with her being exposed and the background being exposed, and then just combining them two, or maybe a flash. I don't think a reflector would really help that much in this case. Next, we have her, I think, at the crosswalk where the actual Don Quixote is, and she's crouching down in the middle of the street. Again, that looks like the crosswalk, and it's just her posing. It doesn't really say anything. But I do have to say that including the full dress is pretty nice, showing it off and being able to be in this area, although the light isn't the best again. And that's just due to the fact that you try to get less people in there, you have to get up earlier. But then if it's this early, that's like right before where it's good light. And this photo right here, it's actually not that bad lighting. So to prove that it isn't all bad. So the people I would recommend this to would actually not be only Yuria fans, but also AKB and SKE fans. If you like the varied look and a little bit more fan service, then I feel like this will fit your needs if you're a photographer or anyone else interested in the photo book. There are other photo books that have done this varied look, which actually I haven't even critiqued one of my favorite in terms of varied, which is actually Akimoto Manatsu's photo book, which I think was actually excellent in how varied it was and how many different things it was in order to express the photo book, which is fairly interesting that it wasn't super popular. So yeah, I've actually done other photo book critiques. You can actually check them out and see what else I've covered. You can see from where I started all the way from Ikuta Erika's photo book all the way up till now and to the future if you're watching this in the future. So go ahead and like the video. Go ahead and subscribe to keep up to date with not only these photo book critiques, but also the news that I do weekly. And that covers the whole AKB48 group and the Sakamichi series. So if you thought this video was interesting, you can go ahead and share with your friends or buddies or people online in order to spread the photo book awareness. And don't forget to pick up the photo book if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the photo book. And if you picked it up, let me know what you really think about it. And as always, thank you all for watching.